So, it's 2023 and a lot of things are happening in VTubing. Nina Kosaka and Mr. Rios' graduation, the rise of Idol Corp, FaZe Connect and other small corpos, Nijisanji making less than desirable decisions, the absolute rise of Advent, Pikami getting into VShojo, Holostars EN losing its 3 biggest members, VShojo losing 3 massive members, the Wizard Game saga, among many other shit. It felt like it was the best year for certain communities and the worst for others, especially among this little political back and forth between different companies. And then 2024 happened with this, and this, and this, and this. And you get a year that was so eventful, it feels like it's lasted an entire decade, yet at the same time went by so fast. What happened? I mean, for agencies, certain corpos are on the rise. V4 Mirai is currently replacing Idol Corp as the second biggest medium corpo. In fact, they just bought Idol Corp actually. FaZe Connect is still thriving and the big 3 in EN VTubing is having its own little back and forth. Though it seems like VShojo is actually winning this little skirmish, Hololive is having its own issues independent of the other two though. But I would argue that the biggest shift in VTubing right now isn't in corporate VTubing, but rather due to the things that are going on in corporate VTubing. It's in the indie scene, and there has been massive developments that I think is just the start of a new trend. The idea for many successful corpo VTubers who now, or perhaps have always started thinking that maybe they don't need their agencies anymore. The meta for most VTubers right now is to join VTuber agencies, and for obvious reasons. It's hard to find support, network, and an established audience as an indie, especially if you're just starting out. In 2023, there has always been a feeling among even a few casual fans that indie VTubing is the way of the future. And if corpo VTubing is going to last through a decade from now, a lot of serious changes are gonna have to be made. There was really no big agency VTuber that was bold enough to have this change. I mean, one can argue Kason and Rusha were the first to actually make that step by joining VShojo, but Rusha was kicked out, and Kason had very special circumstances that made it feel like she had all the right in the world to quit Hololive. It's really in 2024 that cemented that idea, and the problem is, although this event was more tragic for Nijisanji, even beyond Dokibird, the event may or may have not triggered some ideas with other corpos and other corpo VTubers. I want to tell you one thing though, Dokibird probably wasn't the start of this idea. I think she was just the test subject that validated the idea. She proved the concept to be very doable basically, and not just doable, but even preferable. And the first reason is numbers. Even if a big corpo VTuber leaves their agency, a little bit of their active fanbase is always gonna carry over. Hopefully. Provided, of course, the fanbase is actually a fan of that VTuber and not necessarily just a fan of the agency and its culture. There are people who only watch Hololive and Nijisanji VTubers exclusively because they are in Hololive and Nijisanji. The moment they leave, they don't even follow them into their PLs, and it's not like I blame the audience for that. The thing about social media algorithms is that most people only consume what the algorithm feeds them, in their recommended, their Twitter feeds, their For You pages. So if that PL is no longer associated with their agency identity, the algorithm isn't going to recommend them to that same community, unless the algorithm is manipulated to do so. Like what happened to Dokibird and Doobie, and if that does not happen, there will be very little carryover in the fanbase. In certain cases, however, the VTubers' new identities can actually be improved upon if they manage to find themselves with their target audience or hit an entirely new audience. For example, most of Nijisanji's EN fanbase are females looking for male VTubers, so automatically, the female members are going to get a debuff. But if a female Nijisanji VTuber manages to find themselves in VShojo or Hololive or becomes a big Twitch indie, you know they're going to get a boost because their target demographic, predominantly males, are going to be in these communities. But again, even if they receive only half of their audience again, money-wise, it's actually more worth it. See, Hololive and Nijisanji takes 50% of what the talents earn in general. Even if they receive, say, 100 grand in donation revenue, they only receive 35% of that considering YouTube cuts. But even if that same person is able to get like 50k in donation revenue, they get the same amount. Even without the numbers, the lack of the agency cut most of the time I think makes up for the missing numbers. You pile in other revenue sources like direct donations, merch, and sponsorships, and you got yourself in an even more profitable place. Keep in mind, this is an option that's really only available to VTubers with some semblance of clout. Like I said, for most VTubers who are starting from nothing, they have more to gain by joining an agency. This trend is only exclusive to VTubers with a big and loyal fan base. No matter what, agency culture I don't think is ever gonna truly die. Crippled, maybe, but for as long as agencies have something to offer, they're never gonna go away. So if you're a small corpo VTuber or relatively modest VTuber in a big agency, maybe don't start having ideas unless you're confident that you can stage a coup within your agency and pull a Dokibirdian revolt. Unless that decision is forced upon you, of course. But while money is perhaps the biggest factor, another factor would probably be contentment. A talent can be unhappy with the agency for a multitude of factors. Maybe the suits up top don't actually know what they're doing and it's stressing the VTubers out. Maybe there are changes in the agency that the talents don't like. And unfortunately, these sentiments are getting common among many big corpo VTubers. But overall, from what I've discovered, it's for two big reasons. That the talent's goals, virtues, visions, and objectives do not or no longer aligns with that of the agency, or that the talent isn't getting what they expected. For any agency, it's pretty easy to have a particular direction that many talents originally aligned themselves with and agreed to uphold, which is why they joined in the first place. The degree of freedom, the way the rules are handled, even the structure and hierarchy, the money you pay. But when such promises are not being fulfilled or are changed in a way that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, that's when you start having the first sign of trouble. It's inevitable, you see, because VTuber agencies, as they grow, will have to adapt, sometimes in worse or better ways. They have to be much more restrictive if they want more money, need to play off by the rules a little better to not scare off sponsors and other companies, clean themselves up in order to appeal to investors or shareholders, spend more money to even operate. A lot of the old amenities and freedoms may no longer apply. In a way, it's as if big agencies prime themselves to become even more insufferable as they grow, with the only reason people not leaving being the money or the community. And at that point, if a talent has to endure a shit ton of very inconvenient stuff just to work, is when it drains the fun out of VTubing. Now that would be fine as long as promises and results are evident though. And of course, the deal breaker depends on what certain talents can tolerate. Maybe the talents are in it because of the legal protection. Maybe the talent just wants to have fun with a group of friends within the agency already. Maybe they're not in for the money. It depends, right? There's no one-size-fits-all answer. That's why such reasons and musts and no's must be established with the agency and talent upon first contact. It's not uncommon to hear stories from ex-corpo who has always wanted to leave for a long time because of whatever reason, or that a certain talent has thought up of graduating. That being said, the other side of this story is that certain talents are difficult to please. Even if agencies are the most professional, logical, and has a good reason to restrict, refuse, or otherwise do anything that negatively affects a talent, VTuber fans, including myself, are pretty much primed to believe the talents almost immediately. And for good reason. You know, most times agencies are ran by weirdos, but sometimes the VTubers themselves are actually being a bastard. We have to remember, we are in an industry where a large portion of VTubers are actually mentally ill, has some sort of chronic disease, has tisms, or has not grown past high school level mentality. Sometimes, making a talent happy is impossible, which is why it's inevitable for agencies to always have one or two unhappy talents, sometimes even more. You can never really make everyone happy after all, but the right thing to do there is that if you can't make a talent happy, you might as well send off that talent in the most professional way possible. But bunnyfucker, what stopped agency VTubers from recognizing the strat of leaving their agencies once they hit it big in the first place? Why did it take the literal bleeding of Nijisanji for people to actually start making their move? Now, I know I said Dokibird was the proof of concept that worked, but in reality, maybe all of this just lined up timeline-wise for a lot of agency VTubers. Perhaps they planned out these graduations way before Doki even decided to check out. We never really know, right? I mean, the more you think about it, it's a trend that actually started in the Japanese side of the industry since last year, with the exit of a lot of Nijisanji's legacy VTubers reincarnating into new personas. But let's play with the narrative that Dokibird and Vatara's success convinced everyone to do it for the sake of this video. I would imagine that the reasons they didn't do it are two things: fear and loyalty. Because getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of your pre-existing community is a gamble that a lot of VTubers most likely did not want to take. And those that did not make that gamble weren't too sure of their own futures when they did. It's scary. A lot of VTubers have imposter syndrome. A lot of VTubers aren't really responsible with their money. A lot of VTubers aren't used to getting a lot of attention, so even the thought that their current success, no matter how little it may be, slipping away from them is a very, very real fear. Content creators tying down their self-esteem to their numbers is all too common, and the implications of that I think needs not to be explained. Financial insecurity, what they would do afterwards. Nobody wants to go back to a dead-end job, especially if you've tasted the high of being a popular VTuber a year ago and now you're waiting tables making 1/10 of what you used to earn in a month. There is absolutely no shame in that, but I would guess not many people would want to go there. I know everybody memes the scenario, but it's actually a real fear that even I myself is afraid of happening to me. At the very least, if I'm going to go from the Nusagi with 100k YouTube subscribers, making infinitely more than the average 22-year-old Filipino to being a customer support in some shady call center company, I would probably rather kill myself. Agencies also sometimes blacklist their ex-members from collabing with previous friends. And there's also that fear of not being able to access the network that we've built up within those VTuber agencies. And I think that with the stranglehold of agencies almost losing their grip, I think big VTubers are starting to realize that maybe they actually have a lot more power than they thought. At the same time, there are others who feel like they owe the agency, loyal to the agency and its people due to, say, the agency getting them out of their debts, paying for their travel expenses, finding a home within that agency that they would have never found otherwise. Make no mistake, it's valid for VTubers to feel this way. The amount of Hololive Nijisanji v Shoujo saved me tangents should tell you enough about how VTubers feel about this matter. We do need members that are loyal to the culture and community to keep agencies alive. We call those members pillars like Fubuki. So while there are a lot of VTubers who are really in it for self-benefit, sometimes giving a little back makes you special if you're an agency. Sometimes the pros outweighs the cons, and perhaps in certain situations, the cons, despite how harsh they may be, are worth it for the pros. Is this a good thing? Yes, if you actually like the VTuber, but there are some of us who think we like the VTuber, but we don't actually support them. You know, just all buttery words. We only like the VTuber because they're part of this community we like. Like how some agency fans like to pretend that they care about X-VTuber and that people should definitely support them but don't even actually bother to watch their clips. But in general, to people that we actually watch and support, this gives back a lot of power to the individuals and less so to the corporations who has historically not really treated VTubers in the best way. And that is why VTuber agencies, big or small, should be scared of this. The small corpos who will eventually become the top corpos, maybe they don't need to be scared of this as much, but they need to keep it in mind. Because there's a trend of new small corpos actually giving talents better percentages, benefits, and many other amenities in their agency, but those already at the top especially should be quivering at their multi-million-dollar boots. This empire that they built upon the backs of their talents is being threatened if they don't actually shape up and make some necessary adjustments. But making the necessary adjustments is a difficult part. Hololive, Nijisanji, among many other medium to big corpos, have investors now. Investors, stockholders, or people who want to see numbers go up won't like it if the agency stops making as much money in order to, say, give better percentages to their talents, offer more benefits, or give them a little bit of breathing room and freedom which might risk sponsors. Hell, a CoverCorp investor wanted the CEO to give the talents less so the greedy scumbag can get more. It goes directly against the trend of what they are supposed to do in order to grow as a corporation. The bigger the ship, the harder it is to steer, after all. And even if they do make that decision, it'll probably take like a couple months or a year to be acted upon, and in this industry, a year is an entire era. It's scary, really, for these big agencies. I can only imagine the internal panic a lot of these suits on the top are thinking when they're recognizing this trend, because it's a long time coming. Everyone that paid attention to the industry during the Dokibird saga recognized that it was going to be huge, and when those legacy VTubers are going to walk out that front door, it's going to need a little more than multiple fresh young bloods to make up for them. And I think that's their strat. I think these big corpos are going to scramble for the next Gargura, or the next Vox Akuma, the next Suisei, the next Kuzuha, hit that lightning in a bottle once again. There are currently multiple graduated members from big corpos that became indies and seem like they are going to be in it for the long haul and are finding relatively decent success. And the two biggest ones right now is this very familiar looking onion lady and this creature, of which I don't really need to explain to you who they are, right? I mean, surely you know who they are. Mind you, these VTubers graduated out of their own volition this year, not pushed out, graduated. As in, they wanted to be out of their agency so they can hit it off solo and reap the rewards of their work by themselves. I mean, they probably have a team or some semblance of management work for them, but I imagine it's significantly less costly than the amount their corpos used to take. And while I would like to highlight the insanity that their massive successes brought, I started thinking what it could potentially mean. And let me tell you what I think. I think there's a lot of people already on their way out. Gargura probably, fucking Nanashi Mume, Enna, Elira, the whole Nijisanji graduation queue. Think of your Oshi, especially if they're disassociating from the agency or not that active anymore, and the chances that they are already thinking of leaving is a lot higher than we think probably. Hell, some of them are en route into making their own models already most likely. Truly, this signals the beginning of an end of an industry dominated by big corpos, and when they crack and fall, corporations who has better contracts learn from their mistakes the most, and new empires shall rise to fill the vacuum. I don't know when these empires are going to fall, or even if they actually will fall. All I know is that I sense the winds changing, and for better or worse, I think everyone also feels the same.